Hello class and welcome to chapter 2. In this lecture we're going to talk about HR and various HR metrics. So let's get started. In our previous lecture we talked about how traditional HR is evolving into strategic HR management. And a major part of that is being able to show the economic and financial value of the HR department to all the other departments within the organization. While HR is working on making that happen, they have to be able to measure the items that they're claiming that are bringing value. And they have to be able to show that value quantitatively. This is where HR metrics come into play. So a metric is nothing more than a unit of measurement. It's some means of numerically quantifying a benefit or a cost to the organization. It's important to note that when you're developing a metric, that it has to meet certain criteria in order for it to be considered a good metric. First off, it has to be accurate. You have to be able to truly measure whatever it is that you're seeking to understand. It has to be linked to strategic goals and operational objectives. You have to have a way to clearly understand the calculation, meaning that you can't simply make up some fraudulent mathematical procedures and think that that's going to substantiate you as a good metric. It just won't work. It also has to, you have to be able to get information for it. There's a lot of things we'd love to measure, but there's just no way to realistically gather information on it, or it may cost too much money to gather that information. And you must be able to compare it both inside the organization and to others outside. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say I have a really good metric, say a turnover ratio for the organization. Well, I can measure that turnover ratio on a month-to-month basis or a year-to-year basis, and I can say for the last 3 months our turnover ratio has been decreasing. I'm able to make some rational statements about it by comparing it inside the company. I also can take that same ratio and compare it to other organizations and say organizations that are in the same business as us typically have a turnover ratio of X. Our turnover ratio is Y. Therefore, we're doing better or worse than our competition. So metrics are a numerical expression of value to the organization. Here are some common metrics that you'll see HR departments use. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these. That would take way too long for this short lecture. But I advise you to pause the video, take time to read through each of these. So these are key areas within the HR department, and there are types of metrics that you could develop for each one. For example, let's take a look at training. We could look at developing a metrics for the overall cost of training and saying that we're spending less money per employee in training and tie that to productivity somehow. You could look at the number of hours that you spend training an employee, or you could look at staffing. What's the average time it takes us to fill a vacant position, or the cost to hire a new person. We could look at turnover on an annual rate or a monthly rate. You could look at retention, the average tenure, meaning the time that a person spends in a company, the average tenure of employees, and generally you want that tenure to be high. The higher the tenure, the less the turnover, and the less money you're spending on recruiting and staffing. So these are common areas where HR departments can develop metrics to show that they're adding value to the organization and how that value translates into cost savings or increased productivity. Here's some calculations. You don't need to memorize these calculations by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not going to ask you any questions about that, but I want to give you some examples of what calculations can look like for the HR department. It can very easily give you homework or assignments asking you to calculate these and interpret these ratios, but that's not what the plan is for right now. There are a couple of HR metrics that I'll give you later on, not in this lecture, that you will be responsible for, primarily around turnover. But for now, this is just an example of some of the types of metrics and the calculations that can go into them. The concept of benchmarking is very important. I actually hinted to this earlier on in the lecture when I said that we take a look at comparing metrics within the company, but also comparing it to organizations that are outside of us or our competitors, for example. That's what benchmarking is comparing specific metrics for performance to an industry standard or to a competitor or to an organization that's known as being best in class to really see how you stack up against somebody who's doing it well, someone who's executing it very well with significant precision. And then you could look at your organization and see how can you improve. Or maybe you'll find out that you are the organization that's executing this particular activity with great precision. That wraps it up for this lecture. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I invite you to bring them to class or shoot me an email. Thank you very much and have a good day.